Sucheta, it's been, gosh, 10 years since you've been on this stage.
Yes, I have.
And a lot has happened in that time since you talked about the mental GPS and how it is this part of our brain that controls these behaviors. So before we dive into what's happened, let's talk a little bit about executive function and executive dysfunction, if you could.
Yes, so let's begin with the definition of executive function. It is brain's capacity. First of all, it's made of many skills. It's the set of skills that we use to manage our thoughts, our emotions, but most importantly, our actions to produce results so that we can achieve the goals that we have for ourselves, that we have created by ourselves, so that our future self benefits. And most important thing about executive function is that we have two brains, literally one, but there's a boss brain and the worker brain. So how does the boss brain get the worker brain to do its job? And that collectively is known as executive function.
Lovely. Okay, so boss brain, worker brain, got it. I just know that my boss brain and my worker brain, they don't talk.
Sometimes there's a mismatch.
Yes, they don't talk. So would you say, could you kind of give us a sense of, this sounds like it's like business coaching or psychology. There's some relation there?
Yeah, that's a good question, because conventional wisdom, we use the word called street smarts. In business, we call it leadership. In psychology, we call it self-control. In cognitive neuroscience, we call it self-regulation. Employment, we call it soft skills. So I feel it doesn't do justice to the complexity and depth of executive function when we limit it with these terminologies. And truly speaking, executive function skills are made of many set of skills, as I mentioned. So there are 9 specific set of skills. I think we have a little, maybe a slide.
We may or may not have a slide at this
We'll
point.
continue. So, and I am exhibiting my executive function by being very flexible. So focus, working memory, organization planning, time management, your mental problem solving or perspective taking, your ability to think on your feet, and your ability to be self-aware, strategically think, and emotionally resilient. So those are the components of executive function that are very critical, that support our capacity to achieve the goals that we have for ourselves.
So, how does it show up in everyday life? Executive function at when it's working and when it's not.
So I love to give this example that when executive function skills are working, you never hear about it, okay? Because it's like taking a shower. The day you take a shower, nobody says anything. But the day that you don't take a shower, everybody says you stink. Right? So executive dysfunction shows up as procrastination, underfocus, overfocus, multitasking, missing the forest for the trees, argumentativeness, overthinking, underthinking, and also shooting from the hip. So, and then finally having a meltdown. So those are examples of executive dysfunction, if I may say so.
This sounds like me organizing this conference with the team.
Yes. Well, I'll give you an example. So executive function skills, of course, they are very critical for self-management. And in a multifaceted way, we are using our executive function. So executive function skills are also like putting gas in your car. So more you drive, less you have it. So you may be very organized, strategic, and thoughtful, and then in chaos or crisis, you may be completely underfunctioning. You may be doing a really great job in your finances, but you're doing a terrible job with your friends, or vice versa. So I myself like to claim that I have phenomenal executive function skills, if I may say so myself. However, I have taken my mother to the airport at 8 a.m. for 8 p.m. flight. Very embarrassed about that.
Well, I don't know. That sounds like bonus time with mom to me.
Yes, if I have the emotional resilience to look at the brighter side.
And who doesn't want more time with mom?
Of course, me too. Me too.
Okay, so in all seriousness, how do we improve these skills? Can they be improved?
So fundamentally, these are pliable skills. So are you born to play piano? No. We literally understand that teaching playing piano is very much to exposure, experience, and practice. So similarly, executive function skills can be very much learned, and they need to be taught with great care and effort. So there has to be investment in executive function. They're not going to just emerge and be fabulous. But there's some, let me give you an example of procrastination, since you kicked this session off with that. Anybody suffers from procrastination here?
Oh,
Yes.
come on. Yeah. Oh.
So if I'm training your executive function in the area of procrastination as a set of skills, I will approach it 3 steps. So the first step is called psychosocial education. So what if I begin and tell you all time management is pain management? So that means you think you're procrastinating because you're managing your time poorly. No, 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 no. You're managing your emotional relationship to the task poorly. So this psychosocial education is the first step of training. The second step of training is task analysis skills. So in order to understand why am I procrastinating, I need a list. I like to call it glitch list. So why not make a list of 10 things that I have procrastinated in the last 10 days? Now, a pattern emerges. So this capacity to evaluate and see patterns is also an executive function skill. And then looking at the pattern, you can devise a method based on pattern analysis. And the last stage of procrastination is skill building. So that means the skill building is literally learning. If you want to learn to master swimming, you need to do multiple laps. So with executive function, you need to do mental laps. So one of the things that people really struggle with is their capacity to do effortful work. So the training involves doing uninterrupted, unmultitasking, 40 minutes of work for an adult. This is really hard. So that's how you compensate for executive function. Problem with procrastination.
Well, these sound like really important skills. They sound really hard for adults. I have to believe that they're hard for kids. And should kids be taught these skills? Can they be taught these skills?
Well, you know, it's so interesting. I was here 10 years ago, and my topic was mental GPS. And the idea is that everybody has a mental GPS. We need to program it, and we need to utilize it. So without a destination, you do not have a roadmap. And without a roadmap, you cannot leave the parking lot. So you might be driving and feel very accomplished, but you haven't left the parking lot, right? So the idea I presented was that people who struggle with executive function need support and help to improve their abilities. The problem was the framework was more reactive than proactive or preventative. 10 years have passed by, and I see such a cultural shift. You know, the personal technology became available in 2011. Our social media presence and the way it's affecting children has become very apparent to us. And what is the most critical is crisis after crisis. So the most important ways I described executive function come into play is how I manage me in changing environment and challenging times. And in order to do that, I need to be 2023 ready by learning to handle that. And what we have seen, the last point I will make, is that we thought that children will emerge with these skills simply by exposure to education, and that is not adequate, is what we have learned in the pandemic. So focusing on executive function as a strategic approach to learning how to learn is very critical in developing the minds that are ready to learn, but will not learn these skills unless they're taught.
That's really interesting. So instead of treating and developing executive function skills when someone has a disorder or has been diagnosed with something, you're suggesting that we proactively develop executive function skills so that we, adults and kids, can live to their full potential. Is that what you're saying?
You summarized it so well. I love the term full potential. So I have great potential. What if I don't know what my potential is? And what if I'm underachieving and it is other people's idea that I should improve? This is a relationship that children are having with their learning. That means to learn is somebody else's idea, and for you to excel is somebody else's idea. So one of the educational missions that I feel I am on is how to make executive function as the new frontier to teach children how to learn as introducing concepts along with math, science, history, Spanish. And we know those subjects are learned with practice, exposure, experience, and expert feedback. So just in closing, I will say there are several components of executive function training that need to be built in the way we teach executive function. Novelty, something that I've never seen before. ambiguity, something that's not clear, expert feedback, something that is complex and abstract that requires me to think about my thinking and self-reflect, and lastly, strategic approach to self so that I am a better person than I was yesterday.
Wow. So you're saying that these are the steps or some of the components for a framework for kids.
Yes, very much so.
Wow, that's really interesting. All right, a round of applause for Sucheta.